The ushers haven't closed the doors yet. The auditorium hums with low voices, coat sleeves brushing velvet seats, the faint buzz of stage equipment being tested behind the curtain. But beyond the final row, past where the lights dim into shadows, a narrow service corridor stretches into silence. And in that silence, a battered military wheelchair inches forward, slow, deliberate. The man in it wears a sun-faded denim jacket and an old army cap, the patch barely legible. He doesn't ask to be let in. Doesn't need the crowd or the spotlight. He finds a place between a concrete column and the stage door, where the noise doesn't reach, but the music will. He came for one song, just one, the one his brother died listening to, half a world away, beneath a sky burning over Hugh. He doesn't know that tonight, by chance or something deeper, Elvis will sing it. But Elvis remembers. The crowd was still filing in. Somewhere out in the lobby, ticket stubs were being torn, coat sleeves brushed against velvet ropes, and a woman in a blue dress muttered about missing the good seats. But past the last row, behind the dim amber glow of the house lights, there was a narrow hallway, the kind used by technicians and crewmen. No ushers here, just scuffed linoleum, buzzing fluorescence overhead, and a faint echo of a stage mic being tested, once, twice, and then fading into silence. The wheelchair moved almost soundlessly. The metal wheels creaked with a whisper each time they turned. No one noticed. No one looked. That suited Tommy Rhodes just fine. He wore a faded denim jacket that still carried the scent of motor oil and long nights. The collar was torn. His left pant leg was empty, neatly pinned just below the knee where the leg had once been. He didn't drag himself in for pity. In fact, he wasn't even supposed to be here. Someone, a young man with a stage badge and a kindness he didn't name, had seen him outside by the ramp, just sitting in the dusk, eyes fixed on the glowing marquee. Elvis Presley. One night only. The worker had nodded without much talk, opened a side door, and said, "Come on, I'll get you close enough to hear it." So Tommy rolled himself into the corridor by the stage's edge. He didn't try to get into the main hall. He didn't ask for a chair. This wasn't about seeing. He'd heard Elvis before. He needed to hear him again. Just this once. And not because he was a fan. Because of a song. From where he sat, he could just make out the edge of the curtain line and the curve of the stage's underbelly. Through a gap in the cinder block wall, he could even catch a slice of audience. The backs of heads, the shimmer of rings in the light. But it wasn't the view he came for. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a photograph. The edges were frayed from years of folding and unfolding. In the picture were two boys in uniform, leaning against a tank, one of them holding a transistor radio over his head like a trophy. His brother, James. Killed in Hugh, 1968. The photo was taken 2 days before the shelling. The radio had been playing Elvis. That's what haunted Tommy. That morning, in the tent, before they moved out, James had sat cross-legged on a crate, grinning like he had nothing to fear, and said, "If I get taken out, I want that man singing at my funeral. You hear me, Tommy?" Then he laughed, like it was a joke. But it wasn't. That night, James was gone. Tommy didn't attend the funeral. He was still in a hospital bed when the flag came home. And after his discharge, he didn't go back to church, or the Legion Hall, or anywhere they played that kind of music. It hurt too much. Until tonight. Elvis was here. Not the rhinestone version from Vegas, or the myth from the radio. The man. And something about tonight felt different. Like something old was making its way to the surface again. A heavy-set security guard passed by the hallway and glanced sideways. "You're blocking the egress," he said flatly. "You can't stay here." Tommy didn't flinch, just nodded once. "Just a song," he said. "Then I'm gone." The guard stared a moment, then muttered, "Don't cause no trouble," and disappeared into the stairwell. Tommy leaned back. His right hand gripped the armrest tightly. The phantom of his left leg still burned sometimes, not from pain, but from memory. The house lights dimmed. And just like that, the room exhaled. A low, anticipatory murmur rippled through the crowd, the kind that comes before a sermon or a storm. Somewhere, behind the curtain, an electric guitar hummed as someone plucked a low E string. Tommy tucked the photograph back into his jacket, folded it carefully, like it was glass. He wasn't here for the hits. He wasn't here for the cheering. He was waiting for a voice that used to float through jungle air, over blood and brush, when the world still made sense. A voice his brother had trusted more than the chaplain or the CO. A voice that made it bearable for 20-year-old boys to believe they'd get home. The crowd roared. Elvis Presley had walked onto the stage. The applause was deafening. But it wasn't just loud. It was expectant. Like the whole room had leaned forward, reaching for something they didn't quite understand, but believed Elvis might still be able to give. From his place just outside the stage's spill of light, Tommy Rhodes could hear it all, the collective heartbeat of 5,000 people rising and falling in time with a name. And then Elvis spoke, not to the crowd at first, just to the band, a low muttered instruction into the mic that made the lead guitarist glance over, confused, before nodding once. Then silence again, except for the rustle of audience shifting, coughing, adjusting jackets and programs in the hush that followed. He didn't open with "Hound Dog." He didn't even smile that wide, familiar grin the crowd expected. There was something else tonight, something weightier behind his eyes, like the notes of a memory playing quietly just behind his pupils. Tommy noticed it right away. The show had just started, but the man on stage looked like he'd already been carrying this night on his shoulders long before the doors opened. There was a drag in his posture, not physical, but emotional, like someone carrying names he hadn't spoken aloud in years. The first two songs passed quickly. Polite numbers, almost mechanical. The crowd clapped, then cheered. But the energy hadn't taken hold yet. It was like everyone was waiting for him to lock in. And then, without any preamble, came the chord. One chord. And Tommy knew. Before the first word. Before the melody settled. Before the harmonies swelled. He knew. An American Trilogy. Tommy's hands gripped the wheelchair's metal arms so tight the skin blanched. The breath caught in his lungs like barbed wire. The crowd didn't react immediately. The song was beautiful, yes, but most didn't know what it meant to him. Most never sat in a tent halfway across the world with a transistor radio clutched between brothers, hearing that same song echo in the Vietnamese night before everything burned. Oh, I wish I was in the land of cotton. Tommy closed his eyes, and there it was. The jungle air, the musty scent of wet boots and gun oil, James singing off-key, loud and proud, as though nothing could ever reach them in that moment. The way the trees swayed in rhythm, even though there was no breeze. The way time stilled. The way everything after that moment had felt wrong. Look away. Look away. He didn't realize the tears had started. Not at first, but they came fast. He didn't sob, didn't shake, just let them fall, slow and steady, as the strings rose and the choir lifted. And then, on the line, "All my trials, Lord, soon be over." He broke. It wasn't loud. It wasn't messy. Just a breath. just a tremor. His hand reached up and touched the spot where his brother's dog tag used to hang. He hadn't worn it in years, but he felt it now. And then something else happened. Elvis's voice hesitated. Not a mistake. Not a falter. Just the tiniest shift. Like he'd caught sight of something he didn't expect. His head turned, not quickly, slowly, like being pulled by something he hadn't meant to notice. His eyes scanned the side hallway, the edge of the light, the gap in the curtain, the shadows near the fire exit. And there he was, a man in a wheelchair, older than the average fan, face worn, shoulders hunched, something in his eyes already gone, but not forgotten. Elvis didn't move. He just looked. And something passed between them. Not recognition exactly, but understanding. As if, in that moment, two strangers were tethered by something only they could see. The band kept playing. The lights stayed warm, but Elvis didn't look away. Tommy didn't notice at first, but when the final notes of the song rang out and the audience erupted, he opened his eyes and saw him. Saw Elvis staring directly at him. Not at the crowd, not at the front row. At him. At the man who didn't buy a ticket. The man who came only to remember. And the moment froze. No one else noticed. Or if they did, they thought it part of the act. But to Tommy, it was a kind of reverence. Not pity. Not spectacle. Just one man quietly saying to another, "I know." Elvis turned back toward the crowd, lifted the mic again, then paused. The air thickened. The applause had slowed. Whispers started moving like slow wind through the rows. Why was he just standing there? He spoke then. His voice was different now. Not polished, not for performance, just simple, plain. "There's someone here tonight." He glanced back once more at the hallway. "Who reminds me why I ever sang at all." That was it. No name, no explanation, just that. And then the silence. A kind of silence rarely found in concert halls, not the nervous silence of a missed cue, not the expectant pause before a big number, but silence that held weight, that listened, that respected. Tommy didn't know what to do. He felt the attention shifting. Not visibly, no one turned, but something in the atmosphere had reoriented. He stayed still, and Elvis did something he hadn't done in years. He laid the microphone on the floor, gently, deliberately, removed his guitar, and began walking, not toward the crowd, not toward the front, but down the stairs, toward the side, toward the hallway, toward the man in the shadows who had come with nothing but a memory and a photograph and a song that wouldn't leave. Elvis Presley, hair damp at the temples, suit clinging from heat and light, made his way through the stillness, one step at a time. No guards followed, no cameras flickered. The audience didn't cheer. They just watched, quietly, like watching someone lay flowers at a grave. He reached the hallway, knelt down, and spoke the name like it was already familiar. "Your brother's name was James, right?" Tommy looked up, mouth parted. "How the hell?" Elvis answered the question before it was asked. "He wrote me, from the field. Told me about you, about the radio. I only got the one letter, but I remembered." Tommy didn't move. Couldn't. He just blinked, the sound of his brother's laugh echoing somewhere in the distance, beneath all the years and all the silence. Elvis reached out and took his hand. "You'll sit right in front now. This next one's for him. And for you." No spotlight, no cue from the band, just a promise. And as the crowd remained still, something shifted. Something larger than performance, larger than grief. a communion of sorts, between the man who sang and the man who remembered why he sang. And it wasn't over yet. The wheels turned slow, with a faint squeak each time the rubber rolled over the uneven tile. Elvis didn't rush. He walked beside the chair, one hand gently resting on the metal frame as if guiding a fragile procession through holy ground. The crowd had parted without a word. No one had been told to move, but somehow they knew, instinctively, that this moment wasn't about them. Tommy couldn't quite believe what was happening. His fingers clung to the armrests like a man hanging onto the edge of something unreal. The hallway behind him now felt like a world away. His body, too. He barely noticed the floor beneath him, or the shift in light as they reached the edge of the stage. Everything had narrowed to the simple, surreal image of Elvis Presley. World-famous, iconic, mythic, walking beside a broken-down veteran like they'd always known each other. From the side, a stagehand stepped forward hesitantly, unsure whether to help. Elvis gave a slight shake of his head. He gripped the wheelchair himself and lifted the front end over the step with a quiet grunt, guiding it up a gentle incline to the center edge of the stage. The band didn't play. The backup singers stood silently, hands folded. The conductor's baton hung still in the air, waiting for a signal that wouldn't come. Elvis turned the chair to face the audience. Tommy sat there, exposed now to the full gaze of 5,000 strangers, his face streaked with quiet tears, his jacket bunched behind his shoulders. The lights didn't blind him. They embraced him. A soft amber, not the usual brilliance of a show finale. This wasn't a climax. It was a confession. Elvis stood beside him for a moment, then walked back to the mic. The silence in the room had grown impossibly deep. Not tense, not awkward. Sacred. The kind of silence that makes grown men forget they're holding their breath. He didn't pick up the microphone. He sat on the edge of the stage, legs swinging slightly like a kid back home on a porch rail, and looked at the floor for a long moment before lifting his head. "This one," he said quietly, his voice raw, unamplified, yet somehow clear in every corner of the hall, "isn't from the set list." He looked back toward Tommy once more. "I was going to save this one for another night, but some nights they tell you what they need." Then he began. No instruments, no introduction, just a breath, and then the first note. "Well, I'm tired and so weary." The words trembled into the room like mist rolling off a mountain at dawn. "But I must go alone." The crowd did not move. No flashbulbs, no shifting in seats. Even the air conditioners seemed to hush. Elvis sang "Peace in the Valley," like it wasn't for a crowd, like he was singing from some deeper place, the quiet chamber of memory, of grief, of faith bruised but not broken. Each line was deliberate, as if he were building it out of stone. "There will be peace in the valley. For me, dear Lord, I pray." Tommy lowered his head. Not in shame, in reverence. His brother had sung this too. Not in church, not in a choir, but under stars, with a rifle by his side and no harmony but the wind. The same voice, different soul. And Elvis! Elvis didn't reach for vocal fireworks. He didn't rise to the high notes with flourish. He leaned into the quiet, allowed the cracks in his voice to carry more weight than perfection ever could. When he finished, he didn't stand right away. He stayed there, hands clasped between his knees, looking out at the sea of people who now seemed too stunned to clap. And then, slowly, almost embarrassed, one man in the balcony stood. No words, just a hand raised to his chest. Then another, and another. No roar of applause, no shrieking, just the sound of hands clapping. Not loud, not hurried, like the kind of applause you give at a graveside when words are useless and respect is the only thing left. Tommy turned his head slightly, just enough to catch a glimpse of the crowd. Not all of them were crying, but many were. Some covered their mouths, others bowed their heads. The woman in the third row, dressed in pearls, looked not at Elvis, but at Tommy. In that moment, he understood something. They didn't know his story. They didn't know James. They didn't even know his name. But they had felt something real. And that was enough. Elvis rose. Still without the mic, he spoke once more. There's a lot of things music can't fix, but it can carry the weight. He didn't explain further. He didn't need to. As he turned and walked slowly back to the center of the stage, the band began to stir again. Instruments lifted. The lights adjusted, gently. The world slowly returned to its rhythm, but not quite the same as before. Tommy was wheeled to the front row by one of the techs now, on Elvis's whispered instruction. Front and center. Close enough to feel the floorboards vibrate. Close enough to hear the breath behind the lyrics. The rest of the show resumed, but it didn't feel like a performance anymore. It felt like a gathering. Somehow, what had just happened hung over every note, every chorus. When Elvis sang "If I Can Dream," it wasn't just hope. It was memory. He ended the show without spectacle. No cape, no flourish, just a nod, a small smile, and a glance. One last glance toward the man in the front row who had come only to listen from the shadows, and who now sat in the light. Tommy didn't remember leaving the theater. Not really. 1 minute, he was still in the front row, warm light flickering off the stage, the soft murmur of the audience beginning to stir again like something waking from a dream. The next, he was outside in the parking lot under a starless sky, the scent of car exhaust and popcorn lingering in the air. His wheelchair creaked slightly as he rolled down the sidewalk, past a line of people still buzzing about the show. A woman brushed past him, still clutching her program, whispering to her friend, "Did you see what he did? That man in the chair! What was that?" But Tommy wasn't listening. He wasn't really anywhere just then. He was floating somewhere between the sound of that voice, Elvis's voice, and the weight of James's photograph still pressed in his jacket pocket like a second heartbeat. No one stopped him. No one needed to. The moment had already found its place. Not on the front page. Not in photographs. But in something deeper. Less explainable. 3 days later, he was back in his trailer on the outskirts of Whitehaven. The early spring sun cut through the blinds in uneven bars. A small fan ticked softly in the corner. He had a cup of black coffee cooling on the windowsill and a worn pair of boots he couldn't wear anymore sitting by the door, untouched since 1971. The mailbox on the main road was a quarter-mile from his door. Normally, he wouldn't bother checking it every day. But that morning, something pulled him out. A quiet itch in the back of his mind, like a whisper he couldn't quite catch. When he opened the rusted box, there was only one item inside, a white envelope. No return address, just his name, Thomas E. Rhodes, written in a slow, careful script. Inside, folded neatly, was a personal note, handwritten on cream-colored paper. The ink slightly smudged at the corner. The penmanship unmistakably Elvis's, not flawless, but familiar, warm, like he'd written it leaning over a kitchen table, not a desk. "Tommy, I never forgot your brother. That letter stayed with me longer than most things do. I don't know why he wrote to me or why it stuck. But it did. Maybe because he wrote like someone who wasn't asking for anything. Just wanted me to know what he was holding on to. That night, when I saw you, it felt like he'd found a way to say it again. This world's rough, And it doesn't always say thank you. But some things, some losses, they deserve to be sung over, even if it's just once. Keep going. Elvis. Under the letter, there was a check, $5,000, made out to Thomas E. Rhodes, and beneath the check, something else. A photo. Tommy pulled it out slowly. It was smaller than he expected. A black and white print, slightly curled at the corners. It was James, unmistakably James, sitting in fatigues, helmet resting beside him on the dirt, radio cradled in his lap, grinning that same lopsided grin. But in his other hand, a letter, folded in thirds. In James's hand, the unmistakable Elvis Presley letterhead. The same letter he must have written before that final day. The one Elvis had said he'd received. The one that must have circled the globe somehow, landed on Graceland's doorstep in the middle of 1,000 others. And stayed. Tommy stared at the photo for a long time. He touched it gently, as if any pressure might erase it. He didn't cry. The tears had come already, had done their work. What filled him now wasn't sorrow. It was something else. Peace. He pinned the photo to the wall above the small table where he kept his radio, right beside an old war medal and a pressed dog tag. He didn't frame it, didn't put it under glass, just tacked it up where it could breathe. That evening, as the sun sank behind the trees and the buzz of insects filled the fields beyond the trailer park, he turned the dial on his radio until he found the faint hum of a gospel station. The reception was scratchy, but he recognized the tune. There will be peace in the valley. He sat back in his chair, closed his eyes, and let it play. The voice wasn't Elvis's this time, just some local choir out of Jackson. But the words were the same, and for the first time in a long time, they didn't ache. They just settled. In Memphis, the show Elvis had performed that night went mostly unremarked upon in the press, a few column inches here and there. The King returns to the South. A voice that still holds. No mention of the wheelchair, no mention of the hallway. Just grainy black and white photos of a man in a sequined jacket, eyes shadowed, hands raised in some sacred farewell. But in a dozen letters written home from that audience, in conversations around dinner tables and church pews, people described something they couldn't quite explain. There was this moment. He stopped singing, and there was this man. It felt different, like something important happened. But no one wanted to ruin it by talking too loud. And so the story lived, quietly, like most truths do. Not in headlines, not in interviews, but in the chest cavities of those who'd felt it. Tommy never went to another show. He didn't need to. He kept the letter in a drawer near his bed, wrapped in a bandana James had once worn in the field. He used part of the check to patch the leaking roof and buy a new radio. The rest he quietly donated to a local VA clinic under his brother's name. No plaque, no speech, just a quiet gesture from one man to another. The last thing Elvis left behind that night wasn't a song. It wasn't even the check. It was a silence that told the truth louder than any amplifier ever could. And Tommy Rhodes, once a name forgotten on a list of the wounded, became, for a moment, the heart of something bigger. A voice answered, a memory honored, and somewhere in that music, a brother made it home.